One of the most commonly asked questions I get on this channel is, where do I get napkins from? And the answer to that is everywhere. And for our first project, this napkin, it came from Hobby Lobby. And we're gonna be using it to do the iron-on method to one of these wood risers. You can grab these at Target's Bullseye Playground for $5. I was lucky enough to get them for $1.99 at one of my off-brand retailers. Because we want the design on the napkin to pop through, we're gonna give it a nice white layer of paint to have in the background. And I'm doing around the edges too. I did not like the MDF kind of showing on the sides. I thought it would look better with white paint than having that kind of popping out. And people, don't let me tell y'all how to decoupage. If you don't want to paint this and you're okay with your little wood grain showing through your decorative napkin design, leave it just like it is. For our medium on this project, I'm using Deco Art Decoupage in the matte finish. And I'm putting a juicy, thick layer on the top here, okay? Don't hold back. Don't be shy. It's one of the few times I'm going to tell you more is more and more is good. And we're going to let this dry, okay? We're going to let this dry for several hours. And if I'm being honest with y'all, this is why I don't do this method very often, because of the dry time. You're going to be melting the napkin, basically, in my opinion, to the Mod Podge. And here's our beauty right now. Look at this little gem. I wanted to make sure that the whole top was covered in our pattern. And as you can see, this napkin has 4 trucks, which is great for us to be able to get 4 projects out of the napkin, but not when you need one piece of the truck and more of the blue. So I had to dissect the napkin and cut out extra pieces of the blue. Typically, I would just kind of paint around the sides, do a little tear method, but I really wanted this to just be one solid piece. So I'm like, all right, Brandi, we're going to cut this sucker up and then we're going to piece this together, making my life as difficult as possible and ironing them little section by little section. You want to make sure you get all the little sneaky layers off the back of your napkin before you start. And then it's time to bring in the parchment paper. That's right, people. The parchment paper now gets an entrance on the channel, okay? If you're still waiting for the stapler, just sit down because it's not coming in this video. All right, now back to our project. You're going to want to make sure you have a nice little sliver of your parchment paper that's going to fit over your project, and then center your napkin before you get carried away with your iron. Next, we're going to bring in the iron. And this is the one I'm using. You guys use whatever iron you want. And no, I am not sure what the heat setting on this little sucker is. I do plan on investing in a bigger iron so that way I have more of a gauge on the temperature. I get asked that a lot as well, and I can just tell you that I put this sucker on max and I roll on with it. It works really well for the most part, but I do have some people say that if I had a bigger iron and I could turn the heat up, that I would have better applications with certain projects. But as for the iron-on method, I've never actually had any issues using this little iron doing these kind of DIY projects. A little tip if you're going to piece together a napkin like this doing the iron-on method, make sure you're actually just ironing the main sections of your napkin down and not the entire thing. Go section by section because you are melting that Mod Podge and you don't want to activate it before you apply your napkin in the sections you're doing at each time. I hope that makes sense. Then once you have all your little sections attached, go over it one good time for a couple minutes, just making sure that bond is on there really well. And as you can see, this is why I say the iron-on method is absolutely one of the best decoupaging methods you could possibly do. It's flippin' flawless. People, I was so super excited to try this little finger sander thingy out. Oh my gosh, it's Velcro. The little strips are all different, like grits. Picked this up from Temu and oh my gosh, it is so easy and I love it just so much. Just throwing that out there, okay? I told y'all after my haul you were going to start seeing me pop little things in that I was going to be using them, and this was one I just couldn't. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to just go down there, and get all the little bits of sandpaper that I keep around in my bucket, because this is all I'm going to keep down there now. I love it. For our sealer, I'm going to be using this dishwasher safe Mod Podge. Okay. I am going to be selling this in my vendor space, and I want to make sure whoever purchases it can clean it. You know what I mean? And not have any issues if food or something like that gets on it if they want to sit in the middle of the table or whatever. And before I am applying our sealer, just taking a microfiber cloth and making sure I get all the little sandy bits from our sanding off of our piece. This napkin is one of my favorites in my stash, and I could not wait to use it on this little piece. Let me know what you guys think of this one down in the comments. If I'm being 100% honest, I do not remember where I got this little birdhouse wind chime, but I've been holding on to it because I've wanted to decoupage the roof of this little birdhouse. So to start off, I just gave it a nice little white base and picked a napkin. And I chose this one because where the blue is, I thought that would make a really nice little end of roof piece. And for some of you, this little piece might look a little familiar. Those of you that see my little hack video, I did use this piece in a hack. I did not know, people, I didn't know, okay, that using fingernail files as sandpaper was a thing, okay? So I used this as a demonstration to go ahead and sand the rest of our extra bits of the napkin off of the roof. But before I got to that point, I cut down the napkin and measured it to size to make sure the equal parts of the napkin were exactly the right size to fit on each side of the roof, so they matched. Now we're going to go in with the less is more theory, okay? A little bit of Mod Podge, a little bit of tappity tap 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 with our application here, and I'm just using my finger to just tap and smoosh, and then I go up to the top of the roof, and that will minimize the wrinkles. Some people just do the whole thing and there's fine. There's no right or wrong way to decoupage. I like to say this all the time. There are just different techniques, and it's different strokes for different folks, people. Different strokes for different folks. I'm just sharing with y'all what works for me. Now, once I got to this point, as you can see here, I gently had the napkin resting on there. I didn't completely press it to make sure that the design matched on both sides, just like this. Then I went ham using the fingernail file around all the pieces of the napkin that were hanging over on our little roof here. And I gotta tell you, people, I'm gonna be holding on to these fingernail files and holding on to that little finger holding sand thing I got from Timo. These were super easy to use, and now I can get rid of that bucket of all this sandpaper bits I have laying around that I've been using. This is just going to make my life so much easier. Again, a huge thank you to all the people who suggested I try that fingernail file hack to sand. Next, we're taking some Antique Waverly wax, and we're going to just paint our perch, and we're going to paint the bottom of the bird chime. Bird chime? Birdhouse chime. Birdhouse chime. But I got to tell you, you guys, you need to be careful. When you're painting the bottom of this sucker, make sure you're holding them chimes straight up, or else you're going to get that wax or whatever you decide to paint on the bottom of something like this all over your strings. So I actually hung this upside down, just tossing that little tip in there for you guys. Once this was completely dry, I decided to take some of Dollar Tree transfers and just add a few on here, accenting in the colors that match the little house. And of course, you could leave it plain. I just wanted to add a little extra something onto here, and let me know what you guys think of this one. For our little photo stand, we're going to be using a lemon napkin and a piece of wood. The shape of the wood is entirely up to you. And we're going to be doing the cling wrap method to attach this napkin. And if you've never used cling wrap to decoupage, well, you're in for a treat because it works pretty well on napkins. Just cut your cling wrap down to size and the spot on the napkin. Bring in your parchment paper and cut you a nice little sliver. This is going to help your iron to not stick to the parchment paper, because I've learned the cling wrap will absolutely stick to the bottom of that sucker and just melt all on the bottom of it and make your iron kind of gross. Anyhow, now that you've learned from me, then you're just going to iron over the sucker for a couple of minutes, just making sure that the napkin is stuck everywhere. You can check this just by pulling it up and seeing if it's not separating from your wood. When you're happy with that, you can seal it with whatever you want to seal it. I decided to take one of our subscribers' advice here and use another piece of cling wrap to seal over the top. I did really feel impressed by this, but just to feel fuzzy inside, I did take some more Mod Podge and go over, especially on the ends, to make sure it wouldn't be peeling up. It did do that after I sanded off all the edges, and even though there's cling wrap on here, it was still super easy to just sand and get all the extra bits off. I used this medium to do our seal, and like I said, I just went over the edges really well and did a very thin coat over the top. I feel like the cling wrap on top did a hell of a job at making sure that this napkin was on here. While that was drying, I took some half beads and painted them with some antique Waverly wax and a couple tumbling blocks for our stand. I'm using Gorilla Glue gel to attach the pieces because I just really like how well this holds, and it doesn't have a smell like the E6000. This is one of my favorite glues to use, and I put the little half beads on the corners, and here's just a little clip so it can hold our little decorative piece or a photo. Let these dry for about 30 minutes before you attach them to your base. Now you can use whatever base you want. I'm just using a little wood cutout here and the tumbling blocks, along with some wood glue for a good long hold, and that's it for this one. Walmart has a bunch of ceramic pieces for a decent size and a decent price. This was $3.94, and I love owls, so home it came, and we're about to get to business with this little piggy bank. First things first, I took its little plug out of the bottom of it there, and I gave it a nice coat of white matte paint. And painting it is completely up to you. The napkin I'm using has a white base, and I want it to be flawless between the napkin and the color of the owl. As you can see here, there is a slight variation in the color between the original and adding the white paint. This beautiful napkin I picked up recently at TJ Maxx, and I knew exactly what I was going to use this for. I could not wait to get this napkin on here. What I was really surprised at, which is not often, is how big the napkin was, and the fact that the pattern carried on for almost the entire napkin. I loved having so much of this print to be able to mess with, and I had the whole other side of the napkin left as well, so I just stashed that away for another DIY. You know what I'm saying? We just hold on to it and hoard it until we need it again. When you're working with a piece like this, there are many ways you can attack it, but for me, I knew that I wanted this to be decoupaged in the direction that makes sense when you stare at a piece. So I wanted the head to be decoupaged a certain way, the belly, the back. I wanted the print to actually face naturally the way that I think it would if I'm staring at it. I hope that makes sense. So for me, I had to make sure that I was applying the exact sections of this napkin in the exact places, and then piecing together certain parts, because I didn't want to just apply the whole print over the whole ceramic piece. And in order for me to be able to accomplish this the way that I envisioned it, there were several steps I had to take. One was getting rid of the edge of this napkin. On almost every single napkin, it has this little edge. And usually I leave them and don't fuss over them at all. But for this particular thing, since we're going to be glossing this, I wanted to make sure everything was flawless, and we could not tell where the napkin began and our ceramic piece started. For our medium, we're going to be using Mod Podge gloss, and for the application, I'm using a fan brush. I'm a huge fan of the fan brushes because I'm able to use them to kind of smush in between and double check, making sure if our napkins get attached really well. And to help us accomplish this, to make sure that all the pieces are pressed in really well, we're going to use a bunched up little piece of cling wrap. This is going to really smooth out our napkin and make sure it gets in all the little grooves that are on our piggy bank. I cannot stress enough how this should be done in tiny sections. Once you get this tiny little spot I'm doing right here attached, you're going to then flip the napkin up and see how that little bit that I just did in that little spot, and you're going to carry on. If you want to just slap your napkin on here, do the whole thing, you go right ahead. But if you want a flawless look, and when you see the end result, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You want a flawless look, you do this piece by piece and section by section. And as you're going through with this right here, you're going to see where you can naturally tear this and bend it around the grooves that are in the porcelain piece. And I highly recommend checking the edges of the napkin as you go. Before you start removing the excess of the napkin, make sure that it's dry, because we're going to be using water on the edge of a paintbrush to find those natural creases where you ended your Mod Podge and tear this. The napkin will gently pull away from the section that does not have any Mod Podge on it. And you want to also make sure that you're not applying the water on the napkin where the Mod Podge is. It will reactivate the Mod Podge if it is not waterproof Mod Podge, and this wasn't. So I wanted to make sure that I clarify that before you guys are like, let me just paint it over here and then tear it. It will tear it in the wrong spot. So definitely be very ginger doing this. And in case you're wondering, because I did not speed up this section, it took me over 3 hours to create this little piece with the decoupaging. I take my decoupage art very seriously. But on a side note, I have not made one of these for you guys. I have been asked to make one of these for all of you. If you enjoyed this piece, let me know in the comments below. I have a ton of ceramic pieces I'd love to get my hands on and decoupage with you. Also, be mindful because it will stick to your fingers like it's going there. The napkin bits will break off if you have Mod Podge on your hand. For the front of the face and the sides of the face, I wanted to make sure that they weren't completely covered by the florals, and that the florals, like I said in the beginning, were facing the proper way when you're looking at the piece. So this way, you didn't look at it and see upside down flowers or anything like that, or too many. You could differentiate the fact that there were eyeballs right there, there's a nose, there's a belly. So I just carefully placed certain pieces of the napkin and then moved forward with that. I did the same thing with the belly and pieced it together as well. And this cling wrap, just kind of using that to attach, it really gets in the grooves so perfectly. I let this dry for about 30 minutes and then came back in with our paintbrush with a little bit of water and went around all the ends of the napkin where I did not have any Mod Podge and remove the excess. And you're going to want to take your time with this because you're going to notice that certain little sections of the napkin will bunch where the water and the Mod Podge meet, and you're going to just kind of pull that apart. You can use a fingernail or a clay tool to do that. So this way it's a smooth transition from the napkin to the piece. And then you can take a little bit of Mod Podge like I'm doing here on a tiny paintbrush and going in those grooves to just kind of fold out the napkin to just blend in the creases, and it just looks so amazing. Now you noticed I didn't decoupage the feathers, right? That's because we're going to use some mica powder in these two little paintbrushes. One's for the mica powder, this one right here, and the other one is for some brown paint we're going to use to go in between the feathers. I decided, so mica powder is definitely messy to work with, be mindful, but I wanted some shine. And these have a really nice shine on them that kind of just pops out with a little bit of like, I don't know, like a silver going on, like a glitter. You know what I mean? So I really just wanted to add a little bit of something. I did leave some of the feathers white, so this way it blended in with the whole piece. I used a couple colors that match the napkin, of course. And how dark you want these really just depends on how much you kind of smear in your colors. Now, obviously, you've seen all the powder. I was like, I was blowing it off as I went. I let this sit for a couple minutes and then came back in with some of that white paint and just tied in between where the napkin ended and some spots that I felt like the mica powder made a little bit of a mess on. And then in the process of all this, decided against the brown and then used the green. And honestly, I don't think it mattered because it turned out looking black to me for the feathers. You could leave it as it is, but I wanted to add this in here just to give a little bit of pop in the feathers, but get some unity as a whole, that they were kind of all connected. And people, your lines don't need to be perfect. You know what I'm saying? Just smooshing on in there because we're going over this anyway. Once I was finished with this, I took a little bit of that white paint on my finger and then did a dry brushing over all the feathers to kind of just blend this in. And then I let that dry and took some of Dixie Belle's gold gilding wax and gave all of the feathers and the little feet a gentle little smoosh. Look how flawless the seams and the finish is. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love this piece so much. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see me do more ceramic pieces like this. Also, as always, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today and stopping by. I hope you enjoyed these projects. If you need more decoupage inspiration, I'll put a playlist right here for you. And until next time, bye!